John Andrews, one of the most significant representatives of Australian architecture, returns to Toronto, Canada, the scene of his greatest triumphs. John Andrews left Australia in the 1950s to seek the rewards of an overseas career in architecture. He achieved fame far beyond his wildest dreams. He took on the Canadian and American architecture world and won with a series of astonishing buildings. After an absence of 10 years, he returned to Toronto as part of a North American lecture tour of colleges and universities.
It's a pleasure for me to be back. I wonder what the hell you're all doing here. Architecture must be in quite a slump if there's so many architects can afford this sort of time, but I don't mind being back. It's a long way to come. I think my life has changed a little bit since I was here. I've learnt one or two things, and I think the first thing I've learnt is you've got to be crazy if you continue to put all your eggs in the basket of architecture. It's up and down like a toilet seat, and it's not really something that I should add one other thing. I've got no intention of coming back, so it's all right, guys. Don't worry.
He was 29 years of age, a part-time assistant professor at Toronto University, when asked to design Scarborough College. The result is an amazing, innovative mixture of technology and forms which has influenced architecture all over the world.
Well, Scarborough College has been called by many people the first of the megastructures. Megastructures have been talked about for many years, but very rarely have they been built. Normally, universities would be constructed so that there was a history building, a library building, an administration building, a science building. Scarborough College is really one building that contains all these different areas of learning. The reason that it's one building is an attempt to cope with the Canadian climate. The temperature on the site of Scarborough College could be as much as 30 degrees below zero Fahrenheit for quite a substantial part of the year. Scarborough certainly is one of the first, if not the first, Canadian building to make extensive use of concrete, both as a structure and as a finish. Prior to this, concrete really wasn't seen as something that could be left in the elements. It was a so-called unsightly material, and quite a part of the construction problem was to make sure that the finishes were those that could accept the ravages of time. It's rather much like a seashell. I think on the outside where the elements are, it's very rugged and rough. On the inside where the people live, it's very smooth. Scarborough actually consists of two wings that come together at an elbow or a knuckle or a junction, whatever you'd like to call it. In that junction are the administrative functions of the college, the meeting place on which the streets converge from different levels, and as a meeting place should be, it is a much larger in area, of course, than the width of a street, and it is also lit from above by a system of skylights through which the sun and light can come into the meeting place itself.
It was here that Andrews put into practice the ideas which have since motivated his thinking.
In my mind, one of the real sicknesses of architecture is that architects impose style and form on buildings. And with Scarborough College, I had the opportunity to use the thought that a building should really be what it wants to be.
Hailed by many as an exceptional interpretation of contemporary human needs, it stands as one of the most important experiments in urban and educational planning. In the ensuing years, Canada was very kind to Andrews, and he became completely involved in Canadian life. After living in inner Toronto, he moved the family 75 miles out to a small country village. He bought the house he'd wanted to live in for a long time, a 120-year-old stone home fronting the Grand River and guarded on three sides by a 9-foot wall. It was a home to share with his growing family and removed from the pressures of city life. He'd found his place in Canada. When he could, Andrews headed for Ontario's forests and rivers to spin cast for trout, pickerel and bass.
Having been brought up in a part of Australia where there was a fair amount of space, a lot of trees, When I came to Canada, I found myself looking for the same things. Admittedly, the climate is totally different, but that really only has to do with dress. In Australia, you might be fishing for flathead or bream in a river or an estuary, whereas in Canada, you're probably walking along a stream and fishing for trout with a fly rod or a spinner. The circumstances are different, but the need to be outside is the same. Well, my trip to Canada this time has been quite revealing from 2 points of view. One, of course, is I thought I'd got very old. I think I'm tonight with a bunch of people that have at least aged as much as I have and possibly more. And the way in which they've aged is not necessarily in getting grey hair, it's more to do with their attitudes towards architecture. I think that what we've been doing in Australia for the last 10 years is at least as good as what's going on here, and possibly better. We've been able to push the cause of architecture, keep it near the critical edge, whereas what I see around here doesn't necessarily do that. It's building a little bit too much on the past and not looking so far ahead as I think we've been able to do in Australia. It was obviously the right move to go there at the time that I did. By the same token, it's very nice to see people again and have the opportunity to exchange ideas with them. In this particular instance, it's done a lot for my confidence. I don't have that same possibility in Australia.
At an age when most architects are just finding their way, Andrews received contracts for schools, colleges, and art museums. He designed the revolutionary Miami Seaport Passenger Terminal, a building which illustrates his rational approach, a building for people.
We designed a building, finally, that took great notice of the needs of the people who went on boats. They're all people that have saved their life savings for their big trip. They come to Miami, they get on the boat, away they go. It's probably the first time they've been on a boat, it's probably the first time they've been out of the United States. They have a ball for a week, buy their free grog and straw hats and come back. Now, to come back and sit in a tin shed for 5 hours with no air conditioning and 110 degrees really takes the edge off that lifetime holiday. We realised these problems, and out of that came the solution for the Miami terminal. The lounges at Miami are really an extension of the boat. You can come off the boat into the lounge. The lounge is air-conditioned by a land-based system, not a ship-based system that is turned off as soon as the boat docks. You can sit in the lounge and wait, watch your luggage coming off. When it's ready, you can go out and get it very quickly.
There is no precedent for this building design amongst the shipping berths of the world. Harvard University was Andrews' first home in America. Here he undertook his postgraduate studies in architecture. Later, at the age of 34 and chairman of the University of Toronto's School of Architecture, he gained the biggest boost to his reputation when Harvard University asked him to build their graduate school of architecture and design. Gund Hall saw Andrews aiming for free-ranging subliminal communication between staff and students.
Well, Gund Hall is really one space, a studio space, that is tiered in a variety of levels in that one space. That's where the students draw and learn. The building represents to me probably as ideal a space as I could have conceived for the design disciplines to operate in. The site was a very constricted one. Maybe the most ideal circumstance would be for a building of one level only, but the tray system of levels one above the other in one big open space on a constricted site gives the opportunity for people to get together. A student, for instance, may fly a paper aeroplane. And in retrieving that paper aeroplane, he might meet a landscape architect, an urban designer, at the same time hearing a radio somewhere, wanting to turn it off, make it into a little bit of a fight, but still by the same token it provides that ability for visual and mental communication. That space is surrounded on two sides by ancillary areas that really service the studio space, and that's what the whole building is all about. The enormous trusses that span the 150 feet across the studio space are themselves encased in a translucent fiberglass enclosure so that the steel structure is all inside the building and heated. In stepping up the way it does and forming those tiers, it creates a cave underneath it and provides protection for people walking past or people walking through. The cave also provides areas for larger spaces like the major lecture theatre, the library, and the exhibition space that services the whole building. The building could have been one level, but as the site was restricted but still had the need for spaces to open one into the other, then the tiered system was the logical solution. In Gund Hall, there are mainly columns and flat slabs. The exterior walls are concrete, again achieving its finish from the formwork as it's stripped. There are vast areas of glass, particularly in the studio, facing generally northeast, so that the only sun that comes in is the morning sun. The morning sun in any situation is quite reasonable in that it does tend to warm the building up. After that, the sun disappears, and that glass, of course, is where you get light, and also from any one of those tiered levels, people can see out through the vertical glazing in the roof to the courtyards and the surrounding Harvard buildings.
In the 1960s, disturbances rocked campuses throughout the world. It was a time of student unrest across North America, and Harvard was no exception. A new building for the School of Architecture and Design was an obvious student target, an alleged example of administration indifference to student needs.
I think in one way my sympathies were with the students because the administration had been doing a pretty lousy job for quite a while. And finally they figured out the time had come to make some sort of a protest. Unfortunately, and I think improperly, they chose my building to protest against. It was a very obvious and identifiable symbol of administrative decisions, so they took it into their head to protest against that building, and they got together a manifesto signed not only by basically all the students, but all the bloody staff as well. It seemed to include in it as objections all of the points that I thought I'd used to actually develop a design for the building, but no matter, I was summoned and literally dragged by the scruff of the neck to a meeting of staff and students, and I was put in a position of having to defend the building. Now, this was a meeting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the one thing we decided was a 4 o'clock meeting, sooner or later they'll want to go home. Their bellies would get the better of them. And that's precisely what happened. I talked and I talked and I talked. I talked until they all went home. They never ever reconvened, and we never heard any more about it. The most important thing in architecture is actually to get buildings built. There's no use for buildings that are lying around in drawers as unused drawings. In order to get them built, performance is the essential thing. And I really do believe that architecture is a performing art. In the first instance, the performance is that of the entertainer, if you like, the straw hat and cane routine. In the second instance, the performance is that of doing the work, seeing the building built, and finally having something physical there as a commitment to your ideas. To me, architecture is a relatively rational thing. The intuitive leap is a much smaller dimension than most people imagine, but it does include large doses of common sense. And in using the idea of it being rational, then it is very, very necessary to diagram the development of an idea, to explain your thought processes in a sequential way, so that when they're all put together, there is no doubt in anybody's mind as to how that particular building developed. The converse of a rational approach is probably that one which is very often used, I believe, by architects, and that is maintaining architecture as a mystery, not really exposing their ideas. And sometimes I'm very jealous of them in the fact that they are able to build buildings without exposing their ideas. At the same time, I'm convinced that that is quite wrong, that a client must be introduced to the reasons being rational, introduced to the reasons why his building is like it is. And after all, buildings are for people, and the only significant object of building a building is to make sure that it solves the problem of the people that are about to use it.
In 1969, Andrews came home to Australia with an invitation to design what was to become the largest office complex ever undertaken in Australia.
The commission for Cameron offices became a very critical event as far as my life was concerned, because here was the reason to come back to Australia. North America had been a very exciting place, but there was no doubt that that excitement was coming to an end. The original site of Cameron was a sheep farm just with sheep and tree stumps, and in fact one tree. The wonderful thing about Cameron for me was that here for the first time I was able to deal not only with an individual building, but to deal with what really was a town. 4,000 people in any sort of circumstance, whether it's a working circumstance or a living circumstance, that's a sizable town in anybody's mind. So the real challenge of Cameron was not only to make a building, but to make the microcosm of a city, and that's what it became. The resulting building is the size of 2 city blocks in length and connects a residential area to the eventual shopping area. In making that connection, it crosses 2 roads and goes via the bus station, which will eventually become not only a bus station but a rapid transit terminal. It's a horizontal building, mainly, 5 stories high in some parts, but the horizontality of it is really related to the ability to move quickly and freely without the need to wait for lifts to go from one floor to another floor. There are lifts within the building, but they are only ever really used to transport materials up to the 3rd or the 4th floor. Each one of the 9 wings that make up the complex are separated by a courtyard. Each wing itself is something in excess of 300 feet long. They are separated a half a level apart, and they're all identical. And we decided to use the courtyard as a means of identity within the complex, so that each courtyard has a very distinctive Australian landscape character.
During construction of Cameron offices, Andrews achieved a lifelong ambition. He bought a 3,000-acre sheep and cattle property at Eugara in the central west of New South Wales.
Farming, it seems to me, is very allied to architecture, if you believe that architecture is common sense. Farming certainly is only common sense. A fair amount of experience, but every decision that's made on a farm, if it isn't common sense, it's going to be a disaster. And those 2 things, for me, personally, work hand in glove. Maybe they wouldn't for the architect that believes in mystery. Mysteries don't belong on farms. In the circumstance of living on a reasonable amount of land as a kid and not having money, it was necessary to do many things yourself. So by necessity, I learnt to use my hands, I learnt to use tools and to sort of maintain things. It grows the timber, cypress pine, that you can build things with. I'm able to build. I've been able to impart some of that to my older children and hopefully to the lot of them by the time I'm finished. They should all be well enough equipped manually to do the sort of tasks that people ought to be able to do. The farm certainly is a very important part of my life because it replaces for me the things that are missing in architecture, particularly the physical nature of it. I don't mind hard work. I don't mind getting dirty. I find that it gives me the ability to actually mix with the type of people who are totally committed to common sense as a way of life. I like country-type people. I get a great deal of enjoyment out of a few beers in the pub of an afternoon. Those sort of unsophisticated things that just don't really belong in a city, or they're very hard to find in a city. American Express Tower really came out of Cameron. We were doing a big building in Australia now, so it was quite reasonable for a client to think, well, if they've been asked by the government to do that, they can probably do one for us. A major part of the exterior of the building is a stainless steel and plastic sun shading system, not unlike sunglasses that all of us wear, and it operates not unlike sunglasses. The sunglasses not only keep out the glare, but they also keep out the heat. It seems to me that Architects for too long have ignored the fact that the sun is absolutely predictable. And being totally predictable, it is eminent nonsense to actually allow the sun to come into a building, then boost up the air conditioning systems and the machinery systems in order to take that heat out again. A much more logical, sensible thing to do is to keep the sun and the heat out, therefore affecting an energy saving that is only common sense. It's no easy task to convince a developer who's concerned mainly with making the most out of his investment, and I don't blame him for that. You can provide the open areas that give the image and give the address that maybe the major corporation wants. And in fact, not only can you accommodate those needs, but you can do something for yourself on the way. For a long time, I've been very concerned with the high-rise building as being a place that's totally insensitive to the fact that people work in it. It's usually designed as 4 glass walls with an elevator core and stairs and lifts and toilets in the middle of it. The toilets are the thing I want to talk about, and it seems to me that people, you could normally rely on them to go to the toilet at least twice a day, probably more. That's the one opportunity in the planning of a high-rise building, to take the person outside of the building, let him see that the sun is out or it's raining, give him a sense of contact with the outside. The toilets in American Express Tower are quite deliberately placed on the outside of the building. There is a view from the toilet. In fact, it's a loo with a view. The view's a fantastic view to the Opera House and the harbour. I find that to be successful overseas is not necessarily the thing that'll let you make it here. Australia still does operate from the point of view of who you know is a little more important than what you know. I believe I lived through the transformation in North America where what you knew became very important.
John Andrews and his partners have bought a business called Palm Beach Marine and maintain their architecture offices on the same premises.
Palm Beach Marine sounds quite different to architecture, yet in a way it's no different. It provides a 100-ton slipway, a 25-ton slipway. It consists of a small manufacturing business manufacturing hydraulic components for boats, mainly steering gear and winches. That wasn't a very good business in the first instance, but it's now become something that is exporting its designs and its components overseas to the Pacific Islands and the Far East. Another facet of this diversification is the motor sailor Barrenjoey that operates on a regular monthly trading service to Lord Howe Island. I think that makes me a better architect when I don't have to absolutely rely on something totally. It makes for a more easier frame of mind, particularly with architecture as such a volatile profession. We all know that Australia is about as far away from the rest of the world as you can possibly be. So being in Toronto, of course, was near the action. There were the major cities of New York, Boston, Chicago, Detroit. Millions of people involved in those cities, living in those cities, and certainly those cities being visited by people from all parts of the world. Australia doesn't quite have that situation because of its distance. I think it's absolutely vital that people who have the opportunity to go away from Australia and learn and maybe profit, it doesn't matter who they are or what they're involved in, if they don't come back and make some contribution to this place and bring back the little bit of expertise they've gleaned elsewhere, then the country just hasn't got a future at all.
is it. I hope our young guests will undertake the task of turning the earth with all the enthusiasm, energy, and joy that the occasion deserves. Fill the wheelbarrow.
Someone has put the germ in someone's mind that the wind is going to blow this thing off. And this is what everybody seems to be uptight about.
Now we are improvising on this scheme, trying to improve it. It's a very unusual installation. In fact, I don't offhand know of anything else that's been tried this way. We are making every effort we can to see that this thing doesn't leak. And anything to pull it down, make sure, because the way these things are designed, they interlock. In other words, the nose of the upper one overlaps the butt end of the one below.
Well,
I mean, it's designed so well that, to me, the only place that you can get any possible leakage is right here.
that's the trickiest flashing condition.
I think you may have a good idea, but I don't know whether we're carrying it, entirely through to its final conclusion, because we're just
the gravel
putting it on top.
lips over the top of the window, right?
Your window frame below comes in here.
No.
No?
Comes on right on the face here.
Yeah, but the flange overlaps.
The flange overlaps.
Flange covers, yeah.
Covers this.
Yeah, the flange covers, all right.
Yeah, but this, if I understand this right, maybe this is above the window.
It's above the window frame, right?
Then the window frame does not go on top of the
The
neoprene.
window frame simply goes tight to
Okay,
the power
all
line. We'll leave those problems for you to look at. I'd like to get into the anchorage.
Frame.
That's too rough on the fiberglass this time.
Yeah.
You see, this is one of the it's too rough on this time with that gas, that flashing in there. But I really like the other idea much better.
Yeah.
Only we just had it. We weren't holding out on you. That's about there. But it squeezed the heck out of this.
Or even just with a clip and a turnbuckle arrangement if you needed an extra one. But that would mean modifying this, and you can't do that.
Well, do they have these holes on them now, do you know?
No.
Well, so it'd be a matter, they got to drill the holes anyway.
Well,
So,
actually, what we're talking about now is saw cuts.
oh yeah. Well, so
And,
they put in a few extra saw cuts in case
you need them.
in case you need them.
Depends on what
Depends upon what actually they're gonna. You gotta
they can come up with a fastness.
I'll work out a fastening here. I think we're making progress.
Come on. Jesus Christ, come on. Get down here so I can get in there. Yes! All right, here. Come on, get down here so I can get in there. A little bit.
All right, hold that, Tom.
Hold it.
Tommy, hold that. Hey, Henry, I'm gonna boom out.
All right, no, you know what it is? Your chill ring, Richie. Your chill ring. Yeah. See the chill ring? Let's see it here. Work it on one side.
How's that? I'm good here, Rich. Tommy, Richie, I'm all around here.
For Christ's sake, it looked like they put it on backwards. Something. That's a split piece. They must have put that in there. That son of a bitch should have been...
You think this little bevel will be out here?
That's what I'm saying, that they must have
They
put
all
it
like
on
that?
Yeah.
I think his problem is that it's not around, and I think he's got space on one side and he's tight on the other.
If there was some way they could shake that thing, it would go in probably. If they could wiggle it like a young earthquake or something.
If he beat it with a maul, he could get it in, but I don't want him damaging the appearance. That's, the appearance is quite important. They spend a lot of money on round column for looks.
Watch your hand. Oh, show you watch it. Get down here so I can get it. Hold it. All right. Hold it. Right there. Hold it. Go ahead. You got a space right there, Rich?
No, we're gonna come down, don't worry. That ain't gonna come down anyway.
It ain't wide.
I'm amazed you guys did it, really. I shouldn't have to come out here and fight about this thing now. I never saw you cover bolt heads like that before.
Not that many of them, They're not in every...
They're in every run. You ever look, they're in every run. There are two in some. How many holes do I need through there? What's the difference if it's one hole or two holes? It can puncture and penetrate that flashing. Easy. It's pushing against that thing.
Not for me to say, really.
Why not? You're the roofer. You're the one that's covering it up.
Let's fix it. It means I'll have to put a patch over it, though,
If the Slotnick company will revise the detail underneath the flashing, you're prepared to put a patch over the cuts?
Don't like it. Don't like it.
The length of the bolt wasn't the issue, though.
It should be 1.5 inches long.
1.5 inches? These are 2 inch, aren't they?
Yeah, but we were told use 2 inches because if you shorten the bolt much more, you end up with not much wood to hold the blocking to the channel.
The head of your nut is in back of the face of the wood. The bolt projects beyond the head of your nut. It's not the nut that's bothering it, it's the bolt.
So we are instructed in writing to use.
That's just a lot
Get the resting on here, then we can slide it anywhere we want.
All right. No, these have to be cut now, see? See this corner here? Yeah. Well, that has to be cut out of there.
This whole thing has to fit.
Yeah, hasn't been notched enough.
Get the rig in the notches. Why don't you just pull it up against it?
Yeah, you have to cut it from here all the way up to there.
It fastens to the inside here. And it hooks underneath the steel, and then they bolt together and hold it tight.
I think there's 4 of them on each skylight.
You gotta clamp it before you bolt it, so the bolts...
Okay, we'll clamp it, right? Drill a hole, stick the bolts in there, and then unclamp it. That's tight there, ain't it?
Right up tight, out of
That's
sight.
as good as you can get it then.
Yeah. thereafter they shape us. And certainly the architect John Andrews has kept Churchill's admonition very clearly in mind, so that its opportunity and promise will be completely fulfilled. Thank you again.
Infighting and the politics. I'm surprised it got built.
But I think it's a handsome building. And I still need sometime my own cubby hole.
The importance of the building should be in what it does to students and what students. What I've found in dealing with architects is that they are much more creative often than they are articulate. It's sometimes very hard to understand in words what they mean to do, but when it's all over, you see visually that it's a very distinguished achievement.